I've come out to the wilderness to be alone for 48 hours, to seek God and to trust that as I seek, I will find, and as I seek, God will speak. And I'd like to invite you on this adventure with me. I make no claim to speak the word of God, because the word, the Logos, is ultimately ineffable, unspoken, eternal, and yet it constantly speaks. And because of the Spirit of God alive within each of us can know and recognize when we hear it. We can feel the resonance of the spoken word in the depths of our being. We can feel the sense of awe that comes with approaching something powerful and dangerous, yet good. I believe in the depths of my soul that we were all born into a world that's at war. Those who can feel the intensity of the battle being waged in the spiritual realms for the future of life and society as we know it. We can see it starting to spill over into the physical realms. We can see the pathway towards an imminent world war. But the conflicts within our tribes and our nations, and between our tribes and our nations, are merely external manifestations of the deeper battle between domain-independent patterns, spirits, principalities, vying for control and possession of the domains of the world. In a society that has poisoned all the language about the deepest and most important things, and in which all the most important language has lost its meaning and become mired in conflict. Speaking of God, speaking of spiritual war, speaking of battle, will alienate many that might otherwise be sympathetic to the ideas that will pour forth. Yet having personally come face to face with evil, corruption, and malevolence possessing our institutions and our leaders beyond what I ever would have imagined, I'm convinced that the song is right, and silence, like a cancer, grows. And if we don't speak out what we actually see, we have no chance of uniting around what's real and what's actually required, and confronting and overcoming forthrightly the most difficult challenges and obstacles at hand. We don't want to look into the darkness. We don't want to believe that it could be true. Yet when darkness raises its ugly head and manifests itself to object and thwart our progress towards the goal, it's crucial that we don't just naively die in its grasp, that we recognize and address it forthrightly for what it is, a force of evil, a force of malevolence that must be confronted and overcome. Story is the language of the soul. Narrative structure is the way that our consciousness lays itself out. And the eternal invitation is to live out an epic story from a spirit, heart, and soul that's been fully liberated, fully set free to become all that we've been uniquely destined and created to become. And while that is eternally and universally true, there are times in history where it is especially true, where the archetypical stories descend and incarnate themselves and touch earth, and where each of us is brought here to live life as an epic adventure in partnership with one another and God. There are times in history when all creation cries out and longs and groans for the revelation of the children of God who will arise and unite and bring peace and justice and harmony and love and compassion and wisdom and truth to prevail on earth as it is in heaven. And as all creation, even the rocks and the trees cry out, the prayer is consciously uttered from millions of lips. May thy kingdom come. May thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is my only prayer, that the highest intention and greatest good, that the will of God, that the kingdom of God would come and be fully manifest on earth as it is in heaven. It's the eternal vision, the uniting vision that shows up in various shades and perspectives in the prophecies of tribes and nations around the world as they all struggle through the millennia and grope and feel their way towards God, towards purpose, towards destiny, towards the highest intention and greatest good for all, that all creation would rise together into that is a divine symphony, into harmony and right relationship. This total integrated well-being, development, right relationship, harmony, symphony among all creation is my sole purpose, mission, and goal. It is what the heart of love would long for the object of its love, to develop towards the fullness of its unique potential and flourish in harmony with all other loved things as they all help one another develop and flourish. It is the end of the logic of love, the only logic that works, the only solution to the great questions of life. And that love that is the logic, that is the logos of the universe, is not the shallow, ephemeral types of human love we think of, but the deep, abiding, universal, all-encompassing, divine love of the Creator for all creation, that like the rain or the rays of the sun, shines and pours down on all creation, both the evil and the good. So my simple proposal to all humanity and all creation is that the only solution is that we place the Creator back at the center, that we exalt the Creator back to the highest place, and that we base everything on absolute and unconditional love. This solves the crucial question of unity. What is the one thing that unites the many? If we must arise and unite, around what shall we unite? And in the final account, there is only one thing. And that one thing is the generative source and sustainer of the universe. The one true and only God. And it is in the name and presence and power of that one true and only God that I humbly come before you and speak and exist and breathe and have my being and the ability to even utter these words. There are 1,000 competing visions of what should unite us, 1,000 competing ideas. We can quickly dispense with all human-made ideas and ideologies, all the chaos and conflict and greatest sins of humanity manifest in the denominational and ideological battles waged in the name of truth, God, and justice. When we know that there is only one God, there is only one truth, there is only one wisdom, there is only one reality, there is only one justice, and it transcends and encompasses everything that could ever be said about it. It's ineffable, it's eternal, it's universal, it's timeless and without beginning or end. And it subsumes, encompasses, and orders all things within itself. In our foolish, arrogant, and elementary turning away from God, we have a myriad of competing ideas and ideals that spread like parasites, infecting the minds. Those who escape the elementary grasp of competing ideologies then sometimes grasp on to nature as that which should be worshipped and placed in the highest place. Yet when we separate humanity from nature, and we fail to grapple with human nature, consciousness, and God, we create a false idol out of nature, out of what presently is in its present state, and we demand that humanity bow down to it. In the end, we see that creation is just that. It is a creation. And it is in a state of constant transformation, constant change, constant becoming, constant flow. From the very slow living change of the mountains to the multi-generational changing of the oldest trees, to the rise and fall of tribes and nations and civilizations that last much shorter periods of time, to the lifetime of humans, and to the seconds, minutes, or days that the fleeting forms of life exist, and then into the deeper understandings that everything is energy, and not a single thing remains the same from moment to moment. Everything's in a constant state of transformation across all the different cycles and periodicities of all creation in all times and all spaces throughout the universe. And from that standpoint, we understand that we can't bow down or worship something so fleeting. But we have to look deeper to see what's steady, what's eternal, what's true, what's guiding the subsequent transformations of reality across time and space. And when we keep looking deeper and deeper and deeper and questioning what else remains when the thing we're looking at falls or rises, what's deeper, what does it depend upon? Eventually, we approach the deepest thing, the generative source of the universe, the creator, the absolute, God, that which creates and sustains and guides the subsequent transformations of the universe over time. And then we discover that that is the one and only thing. As everything else rises and transforms and falls, there's only one thing that remains, that is the generative source and sustainer of all those transformations and creations across time. And when we understand that, then we start to understand the epiphany of the inter-existence of all things arising and becoming from one source. We start to understand that all creation is the creation of one creator, that it's all loved and it's all cherished and it's all part of the same exploratory process of creating, growing, becoming, progressively realizing all that the Creator has in mind. And when we finally grasp the inner existence of all things and understand that every heartbeat, every breath, every blink, every second is all created and permeated by and sustained by and held and ordered in one, then we start to understand the nature of absolute and unconditional love that holds and guides and permeates the entire process. And when we begin to understand that, we can begin to understand the manifest Spirit of God is differentiated from the transcendent and eternal. And then when we understand that eternal and universal Spirit creating and sustaining all life is also present within each and every incarnation, we start to understand the Trinitary nature of God. And when we start to understand the Trinitary nature of God, we start to understand the idea of a body, of a unity, of a oneness among all creation. And when we finally understand that all creation, by definition, is the manifest physical embodiment of that which is creating and sustaining it, then we start to understand the prayer of Jesus that we would all be one, just as He and the Father are one. We start to understand why the favor and love of God is not limited to any tribe or favored people, but extends and beckons and welcomes all creation without exception. We start to understand that as one inner existent creation, it is absolutely true that what we do or do not do to help or harm any other aspect of creation, we do or do not do unto ourselves and unto God. We start to understand why, when we pick up one piece of trash, or unclog one artery, or provide one piece of food to a hungry soul, or give one sip of water, we are actually helping and healing God. We are doing it unto Jesus. We are doing it unto God. We are doing it unto the Spirit. We are doing it unto ourselves. This inner existence of all creation with the Creator is maybe so obvious and self-evident, it doesn't warrant this 10 minutes of discussion. And yet collectively, we are not living as if it were true. We are making weapons as quickly as we can, threatening one another with them, and deploying them against one another, reaping massive destruction and loss of human life, and destruction of the environment and all the creatures that interexist with us and co-create and sustain with us. We are attacking, slandering, and lying and defaming one another to gain position and power in an illusion of separateness. We're dumping toxic chemicals and pollutants into the air, water, and soil without regard for all the life contained within and everything downstream of us, and without recognizing that as one, we are all downstream of our own pollution and toxicity and deception and destruction. All the games and present constructs of humanity become so laughable when you step back and look down at worksite Earth as one tiny little piece of the body of creation, cancerously at war with itself, destroying itself, tending towards death. Being one body, perhaps we should be concerned when we destroy 2/3 of the insects and pollinators. Being one body, perhaps we should be concerned when we destroy 2/3 of the population of animals. Being one body, maybe we should be concerned when we destroy 2/3 of human sperm production and fertility. Being one body, maybe we should be concerned when we discover that even the purest rainwater in the Himalayas and Antarctica and the remote stretches of the world is polluted toxically with chemicals that will last hundreds of years at levels far beyond what most modern nations allow in their drinking water supplies for their populations. And that every microbe, every tree, every plant, every animal is being choked out by that pollution and is slowly dying. Maybe we should be concerned when we understand that a house divided against itself cannot and will not stand. And we see our tribe divided against itself. When we see our nation divided against itself. When we see our geopolitical powers divided against ourselves. When we see humanity divided against nature. When we see our minds and ideologies and religions divided against themselves. And when we understand that any body divided against itself will fall, and when we discover that we are all one body, then we discover that the end of our present trajectory is suffering and death for billions of people, countless generations, and trillions of plants and animals. Eventually, when we come to the logical and inescapable conclusion that the end of our present trajectory is suffering and death for generations and generations, we then realize that something must be done. We look around and can ask questions like, what the fuck is going on and who is in charge around here? Over time, working on dozens of large-scale heavy civil job sites, I developed a quick intuition for walking onto a job site, being able to drive around for an hour, talk to different of my coworkers and figure out whether things were on track or off track. And you could imagine descending and dropping into worksite Earth, starting to walk around and look at what was happening and talk with different people. And it's obvious that we're on the wrong track. And it's not just one person's opinion. Most studies and surveys right now seem to show that only maybe a quarter of the population, human population, seems to report to surveys that they think that we are on the right pathway. And many of those are probably politically motivated and swept up in having to answer that way because of their political or tribal affiliations. It's hard to imagine that any sane person could look at the chaos and destruction and division and injustice and oppression permeating and gripping the world and say, yes, we're on the right pathway. This is the direction we should go. Let's continue and accelerate. Yet that is exactly what we are doing. Accelerating, accelerating, accelerating down the pathway of our current trajectory without understanding or knowing where we're going, why it matters, why it's the wise right place to go, how it will affect current and future generations of life, who's driving, where are we going, and why. I don't think we actually knew this just several years ago. But it only takes a few hours of research and thought now to understand that we are collectively indwelling a vessel that's headed rapidly at an accelerating rate towards its demise. Imagine yourself awakening to find out that you're on the Titanic, a ship accelerating towards death and destruction for nearly all its inhabitants. Imagine that realizing this, you begin to rapidly search and try to discover who's in charge, who's steering, where are we going, why are we doing this? And then imagine that as you approach the ship, you see hundreds of competing and warring factions, everyone arguing, divided against themselves, drunken, brawling, completely out of control, chaos, disharmony, disorder. And imagine that as you start listening to the messages being broadcast from the bridge, you realize that they're all lies. They're all meant to intentionally cause deception and foment conflict and division among the passengers. And then imagining that in partnership with the Spirit of God, you remember and you rise up and hover over the chaos of the ship, and you're able to look down and you're able to see all the passengers intentionally separated out into warring factions, yelling, fighting, waging war against one another, threatening, defaming, slandering one another. And the powers that be on the bridge are at war with each other, drunken on their own power, pulling in different directions, undermining each other, and vying for support from the warring crowds to see who will become the captain of the chaotic mess. Such is the state of worksite Earth. Such is the state of vessel Earth as we soar through space towards our destiny. Such is the fate of the vast majority of our tribes and nations, whose structures of power and authority are hopelessly divided, decepted, and at war with one another. So the first obvious epiphany is that we're on the wrong track, the wrong trajectory, and we're accelerating towards our ruin. The second epiphany is that the chaos and division among all us, the people, is being intentionally sown and fomented by the destructive and corrupted power structures on the bridge. The third epiphany is the corrupted and co-opted institutions and power structures on the bridge are beyond repair, have absolutely no concern for the well-being of the vessel or its constituents, and in fact would intentionally sacrifice and destroy the vessel and any of its groups of constituents for their own positions and power. Once this becomes recognized and obviously true, a tremendous challenge presents itself. Hovering high above the chaos and looking down, prayerfully in dialogue with God, seeing the warring tribes and factions, the chaos, the deceit, the intentional destruction, recognizing that the vessel is accelerating towards its ruin and that no one will be spared, and recognizing that as of now there is no other container, there is no other vessel. This one earth is all we know that we have for current and future generations to come, and recognizing that none of the existing institutions or leaders on the bridge could possibly be capable or willing to hear and act and lead. The amazing inquiry becomes, what must be done? When we see we're on the wrong track, when we ask who's in charge and what's going on around here, and when all that comes back to our ears are lies and deception and division and slander and blame and finger pointing, then it becomes clear and obvious that an outside intervention has to happen, that no solution can come from within the existing system, that it would be foolish to add our voices to some portion of the cacophony, warring against some other portion of the cacophony, that it's all just deceit, chaos, and division, and that none of it is aligned with the highest order, view, and wisdom and spirit of God. When there is no them out there who we can appeal to salvage the situation, it becomes obvious that it is up to us. And then the great question becomes, who are we? Who is us? Who is it that has to arise and unite beyond the chaos, dividing the society aboard the vessel? Who is the we that must intervene and rush the deck and seize the helm and avert disaster and bring all the chaos and calamity back into a proper order? For the one hovering above the chaos, anyone hovering above the chaos, the answer becomes me. I am responsible because I can see. And recognizing that there's nothing we can do in isolation, then it becomes a partnership with the Spirit of God. And recognizing that the Spirit of God is in many others, it becomes a collective act of partnership and co-creation among all those imbued with the Spirit that can see. What unfolds on the vessel of society accelerating towards its ruin is then something like a tipping point, where the one who sees understands that they're not the only one who can see, that there must be others, and so they rush and do everything in their power to identify and locate the others who can see. When the first 2 or 3 or 12 who can see find one another, and they all understand that the entire vessel is headed towards ruin and destruction for all, and they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if they do nothing, that ruin is imminent. And when they understand that it is their responsibility as those who can see, in partnership with God, to do whatever is required, to do everything in their power, to attempt to avert destruction and disaster and calamity, then the question becomes how they will begin to organize themselves, what they will do, how they will begin to wake up and find the others. So when the 3 or the 12 find one another, they understand that they don't have enough power to actually storm the deck, take the helm, and reorient the ship towards a trajectory of safety. So the first part of the plan has to be to find the others. This is an exceptionally dangerous plan because when the entire vessel is at war with another, any word spoken that doesn't sound like the others will set the mobs against you. So it becomes a very dangerous mission. It becomes something like the prophetic voice that in the midst of a society headed rapidly towards destruction has to forthrightly go out and speak the words and convey their understanding of what's happening, what's at stake in the wrong pathways, recognizing that they're likely to be killed for speaking the truth. But that truth that's being spoken is aligned with the same spirit that rises up and hovers over the waters of chaos in Genesis and speaks forth the truthful word, the truthful logos that brings forth the new creation, the new habitable order that's good. And so the reason that I'm speaking these words and taking the risk of embarrassing myself and suffering far worse than embarrassment is because I believe with all my heart that our vessel is on the wrong trajectory, that we are collectively headed towards ruin, that the building is on fire, and that if we don't rapidly change course and get ourselves to safety, it might be generations and generations and generations before we have another opportunity to do so. And so it is that I speak these words, understanding that they might be inadequate, understanding that they might be misunderstood, understanding that they may make no sense to 99 out of 100 or 999 out of 1,000, but that nevertheless they're so self-evidently true that there must be a few on the vessel who can hear them and receive and respond and understand. So if by any chance you've made it this far, and you can hear and see and understand what I'm trying to convey, everything within my spirit and soul longs to unite, to coordinate, to move together, to awaken the others who can see, even if they may only be a few of every 100, because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if we can reach 3 out of every 100 passengers on this vessel, we can turn the entire thing around and avert catastrophe. So it may be that we're something like 30 minutes into a story where we understand that in the beginning and in the end, God, the absolute, the ideal, the generative source and sustainer of the universe is, I am. It's the beginning and the end of the story. And in the midst of that story, we've made great progress as a human species. We've overcome so many challenges. We've come so far. We've forged structures and technologies that would have been beyond the wildest imaginations even a generation or two ago. And yet it's obvious that despite our best efforts and despite all our progress to date, we're rapidly accelerating towards a ruin that would be ruinous not just for us, not just for our children, not just for our grandchildren, but for generations and generations to come. It's obvious that we're not operating as a human species according to the logic of love. It's obvious as a human species we haven't placed the generative source and sustainer of our universe, God, at the center of all. And it's obvious that we're accelerating rapidly towards our ruin, every day extracting and developing ever more powerful means to accelerate the vessel of society towards where it's going. And the amazing, beautiful, glorious, inspiring, insightful thing is that there's only about a quarter of us who can't see that we're accelerating in the wrong direction. And if for the first time in human history, 2/3 or 3/4 of us know in the depths of our soul that we're headed in the wrong direction, and if we have the ability to communicate and coordinate across levels at that scale, that means there is absolutely an unprecedented opportunity, never before realizable in human history, For the 2/3 or 3/4 of us who can see, to snap out of the illusions, to understand that all the divisions and factions and ideologies that we're warring for are false fictions, propagandas, figments of our imagination, parasites weaponized against us. And once we realize that, and once we understand our existence as one body of creation under God, headed towards ruin and destruction after so much hard-fought progress, we have the opportunity to do anything at all we choose, and not only of our own doing, but necessarily in partnership with God and one another. And when we partner with God and one another, we understand that forces beyond our wildest imagination stand ready to come to our aid. And so God is one. I am one. Together, you and I are two. And with the others that we've already found, we're already a small army. We're already the 3 or 12 or 1,000 who can already see and believe and understand that it's up to us, and that there's no existing organization or structure on earth that we could possibly put our weight behind that would cause the ship, the vessel of society, to turn and advance towards its destiny, and everyone to be secure and safe and prosperous and harmonious. We understand now fully and completely it is up to us, whoever we are, whoever the we is that is here on earth at this moment, incarnate to meet this moment in history in partnership with the Creator and all creation that would possibly arise and unite and join us. And I, as an individual, know that it is already possible for me and you and us, just the 5 or 12 of us, to wake up the population, grab the reins, grab the helm of the vessel of society, and turn it towards safety and get reoriented towards the goal. But I also know that the we who can see that we're on the wrong direction is 3/4 or 2/3 of the entire population of our planet. And I've already personally identified not only 3 or 12 of us, but 500 to 1,000 of us who are immediately aware, united in purpose and cause, and ready to move and advance. It only takes 3 or 12 of us to decide that we are going to become 1,000 of us. And it only takes 1,000 of us to decide that we are going to become 3% of us. And it only takes 3% of us to decide that we are going to become one higher order functional unity, that we are going to arise and unite to transform our lives and our world. And when we look across all the schools and restaurants and community centers and places of worship and football fields and basketball stadiums and concert venues and communities, tribes, and nations, and if we were to imagine that just 3 of every 100 people were trained, equipped, connected, and empowered, and knew that they had a global force for good united behind them, everything would become possible. Any crisis or opportunity could be responded to. And the amazing and audacious target, goal, deadline that we've set, taking in wisdom from spiritual traditions, indigenous traditions, mathematics, logic, systems theory, is that we need to identify, train, connect, unite, equip, empower that 3%, that roughly 240 to 250 million individuals capable of leadership, growth, development, self-governance, team formation, leadership, organization, communication. We need to connect, equip, and empower them by 2026. That gives us 36 months from today. That gives us 12 quarters. And while we don't pretend to know if our timing is right, because only God knows, we know that it is an absolute, massive, and positive good if for the first time in human history, 3% of the world's populations across tribes and nations, divisions and denominations were connected, equipped, empowered, and united in service of our overarching goals and values. Over and over again, through convenings with hundreds of individuals, as we've pondered the deepest questions and asked questions like, what is the one thing that everyone thinks is impossible, but if we could achieve it, everything else would become possible. Every other domino would fall. The answer that always comes back is unity, and that matches the basic spiritual element in the world that causes all upward towards unity through love. In the face of a seemingly insurmountable and overwhelming crises and crises of crises, the one thing that makes everything else possible is higher order functional unity among a global body actually significant and powerful enough to meet the needs, solve the challenges, and accomplish the goals inherent in this unique moment in history. It's possible, everything's prepared, and it's immediately at hand.